What's going on, guys? Today I thought we would do a kind of a inspection video on a used vehicle. Now today we've got this 2004 Jeep Grand Cherokee Laredo that we're going to be looking over, but this would apply to kind of any vehicle you're looking at on the used market, from a private seller, whatever. Just some kind of things to look over and watch and listen for on a inspection of that possible vehicle you're going to buy. Now we'll take it out on a drive, we'll listen to it, we'll see what it's doing, if anything needs to be looked over. Then we'll put it up on the lift and give it a look over underneath. Now you may be saying, hey, I don't have a lift, I'm not going to be able to get under this thing, and that's where a local shop or your local dealership would come into play. We a lot of times will have somebody bring a vehicle to us saying, hey, can you look this thing over? I'm thinking about buying it. Let me know what all is wrong with it. And typically that's not going to be too much of a charge, $50 for a decently thorough vehicle inspection. And you may be thinking, man, I really hate to spend $50 on a vehicle if I don't buy it. But if spending $50 on that vehicle could save you from buying something that needs thousands of dollars in repairs, then those $50 may be worth it. So let's do a quick walk around on this, kind of run through everything. We'll go out and drive it and then get it in the shop. So like I said, guys, we've got this 04 Jeep Grand Cherokee Laredo. Now, obviously a visual inspection that anybody can do. We're just going over the vehicle looking for bumps and bruises, scratches, any, areas of concern. Now you may want to do a little research before this and find kind of any common rust areas on the vehicle you're looking at. These Grand Cherokees are known to rust out on these quarters, back here on the fenders and down here on the rocker panels. So definitely do your research and figure out where those common areas that rust are, so you're a little more educated when you are looking this thing over for the first time. Take a look underneath, make sure you don't just have massive rust issues. But at least in this case, this is a really clean, non-rusty, non-beat up Grand Cherokee. Now obviously you're going to have some bumps, bruises, scrapes, because depending on your vehicle, you're getting a 10, 15, 20-year-old vehicle. But at least in this case, this is really nicely maintained, really clean. We've got leather seats that aren't torn and falling apart. So another thing, if possible, is to start that vehicle up and listen to how the engine sounds cold. So we'll fire it up, and we're just listening to make sure we don't have any knocking, any, piston noise, any valve train noise, any abnormal noise that we shouldn't hear. Making sure the engine's not shaking, vibrating, doing anything, again, that it shouldn't be doing that would be a cause for concern. Now additionally, while you've got that vehicle started, it is a really good time to run through, make sure all of the window regulators work, obviously on all four doors, because that again is kind of a costly repair if you've got to be immediately replacing window regulators. Now we do have a check engine light. So depending on your dealership or shop, they may be able to hook up real quickly, at least tell you what code that vehicle has, so you're kind of able to help use that better on buying the vehicle. If it has a catalyst efficiency code and needs catalytic converters, or if it has a misfire, or what. So if you can, see what codes it has, and that'll help you make a better, more educated decision on buying that vehicle. So let's get this thing out on the road, drive it, make sure all of our HVAC controls work, make sure there's no big nasty clunks from the suspension, and then we'll get it in the shop. So guys, some of the stuff I'm listening for or trying to feel for while driving a vehicle for an inspection or anything like that is, first and foremost, engine and transmission. Does the engine feel as powerful as it should? Does it feel like it's misfiring? Does it pull like it should? And equally with the transmission, does it feel like it's shifting when it should be, it's not slipping and sliding through gears. Obviously, if we had a manual transmission vehicle, we'd be trying to feel for that clutch, put it into a higher gear, kind of roll into the throttle. That's when you're gonna see if a clutch is worn out and slipping or not. Once you've kind of determined those two big main items, you're also listening for driveline noise. Now, a lot of front-wheel drive vehicles aren't going to have as much issue with that, but you're still going to have wheel bearings, front and rear, that could be causing a noise. Now, if a vehicle's older, higher mileage, or if that vehicle's, hit a curb during the winter, something along those lines, you could have a wheel bearing that's going to be making noise. And most of the time, you're gonna need to be at a higher speed, 50, 60 mile an hour kind of highway speed to get that wheel bearing noise to come into play. And if you do think you have a wheel bearing noise, a lot of times you can kind of row the steering wheel back and forth to put a little bit of side load on those wheel bearings to help determine, yeah, we've got a wheel bearing noise or what. Now, all of your trucks, SUVs, solid axle stuff, you've got all of your axle bearings that could be making noise, pinion bearings, carrier bearings, axle shaft bearings. There's a lot of things to go bad and make noise. And yes, the part itself may not be that expensive, but the labor, unless you can do it yourself to rebuild a rear axle, front axle, to replace a front pinion bearing, is going to be really, really expensive. So you'll be able to, hopefully, if you still want the vehicle, that is, use that as kind of leverage when you are shopping, buying, negotiating that used vehicle. And obviously, anything and everything you can use, kind of write down a big long list, will help you be that shrewd negotiator that you need to be to get a good deal or price on those vehicles. Now, next thing up, we're feeling for suspension noises, clunks, bangs, bounciness. If the shocks are blown out, we're just feeling for how that vehicle should be driving down the road and if it's got any issues. Because if we were to lift the vehicle up on a lift, look it over before we drove it, we may not know, hey, on the test drive, there was a lot of clunking from the front end. We need to take a look at the shocks. We need to take a look at the sway bar end links, because if we lifted it up, looked at it, we wouldn't know kind of where we need to point our eyes to on that under vehicle inspection. So that's why I kind of like to take a drive first, just so we know what's going on. One thing you'll also want to take a look at is the vehicle's alignment. Now, driving down the highway, you can relax your hands off the wheel for a little bit and see, does the vehicle pull left, pull right? Does it track nice and straight down the road? We could have a tire issue causing a pull also, but a lot of times vehicles haven't been aligned for who knows how long, and that's going to be a cause of a pull. Now, this vehicle tracks nice and straight down the road. The one thing we do notice is our steering wheel is slightly off. Now, on most independent suspension vehicles, that's kind of a cause for concern because we've got tow out of spec, we've got something like that going on. But a vehicle with a solid axle, you can still have your tow spec in place and just have your drag length that needs adjusted for whatever reason. So we'll need to get this thing on the alignment rack, make sure that tow's dialed in, get the steering wheel straight, and it should be good. Another thing you want to check while you're at highway speeds is the brakes. Now, of course, you want to make sure you've got brake pedal pressure. We don't have a bunch of air in the line, something like that, but we want to make sure the brake rotors aren't warped. Now, specifically with these older Grand Cherokees, warped rotors are very, very common. That's a common issue to come in for. Hit the brakes, the vehicle shakes. So we're doing 65 miles an hour. We're going to roll onto the brakes pretty decently, and this thing is nice and straight. Now, if you had front brake rotors warped, when you got on those brakes, your steering wheel would be shaking back and forth. Or if just your rear brake rotors are warped, you'd get on the brakes, the steering wheel would be nice and smooth, but your brake pedal would be pulsing. So Again, not that that's some outrageously expensive repair to have your rotors turned or replaced, but that's another thing you'll be able to use to help negotiate that price on the vehicle. You're also obviously going to want to check over your HVAC, make sure the heater works. Run it all the way to cold, make sure your air conditioning works, make sure it moves through all the modes, vent, floor, defrost, because that is also an extremely expensive repair on any vehicle, to have to remove that dash to replace a actuator or to replace a door if it breaks in the HVAC housing. So definitely make sure you test all the modes, your temperature, all of that, because that may point you to, hey, the air conditioning doesn't work, we've got a leak with the refrigerant. We need to look into that when we do our inspection on the vehicle. So let's get this thing into the shop, up on the lift, and we'll give it a good look over underneath and see what else might be hiding. So guys, now that we're under the hood, we are giving it a good visual inspection, looking for any massive leaks, any hoses cracked, you know, check the belt condition. We're checking for anything and everything that might look, you know, or show us that the vehicle has been poorly maintained. Obviously this thing's a little bit dirty, dusty, looks like it was maybe a dirt road vehicle, but all of that'll clean up nicely with power washing. Another thing we want to check is, you know, pull the engine dipstick, transmission, check the conditions of the fluids. If they're completely burnt, dirty, nasty, then we know the vehicle hasn't been cared for very good. But if they aren't that bad, we know we just need to change some fluids on this thing and get it as clean as it can be. Again, check the air filter. All of these things will kind of help us give a better clue on how that vehicle's been maintained and how nicely its life has been. So we'll get it up in the air and take a look underneath now. So now that we are underneath this thing, we are looking for oil leaks, rust, damage, any horrible bad things that would make us want to run away from this vehicle. Now obviously, being a 2004, we do have a little bit of surface rust on things, but nothing that is structural, making it fall apart. You know, here are those rocker panels that often rust out on these older Grand Cherokees, and this one, they are solid. So that's a good sign that you've at least got a solid chassis platform to go off of. Now, as we come forward, we do have a little bit of an oil leak, but this is the 4-liter inline-6 Jeep motor, and if it's one thing that it's known for, it is they do like to leave and mark their territory. So that's not a horrible issue on this. You know, we may need to throw a oil pan gasket, you know, it may have a rear main seal, something like that. Now, depending on the vehicle, that may be more or less devastating, but at least with the Jeeps, that's kind of a common issue. We're also looking at drive shaft, we're looking at U-joints. We're giving the brakes a look over to make sure we don't need to have brakes replaced immediately. And at least in this case, we have good brakes. Obviously, the little bit of leak that we found there in the front, but nothing that's at least scaring us away from this vehicle. Our radiator is nice and dry. All of our hoses, engine mounts, everything looks good, even at 116,000 miles like this vehicle has. So other than our few leaks, this thing is definitely something that would be worth buying and definitely worth putting a little more money into to make it as nice as it could look. Well guys, obviously everything we looked at and talked about is pretty common sense car stuff, but at least that gives you a little bit of my process on how I go through and look at a vehicle if I'm looking at it for an inspection or for buying it personally myself. And hopefully making that list of all of the issues, leaks, rattles, check engine lights, concerns like that will help you be able to better shrewdly negotiate with that seller and hopefully get the best deal possible, or let you know you need to turn around and run from that vehicle as quick as possible. So guys, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you guys next time.